Hello, welcome to today's presentation brought to you by ReTech Life Sciences. Interesting fact about today, it's actually Tuesday. The date is a palindrome and is reported not to occur again in the same format for another 400 years. So interesting marker for today. We will be charting a course for unique device identification, UDI requirements for health authorities in Asia, including China NMPA, South Korea MFDS, and others with emerging guidances. We will explore the regulatory regions, post some frequently asked questions and answers, and talk about what your team can do now to prepare for product data submissions. This is a live event. It's being recorded, and everyone who registered will receive a follow-up email with links to the recording and slides. Do share those with your team. The slides have a wealth of information. Welcoming questions during the presentation, and we'll address as many as possible at the end, so feel free to add them at any time in the questions panel. And if we don't get to your question during the Q&A session, someone from our team will get back to you individually quite soon. All right, UDI developments in Asia. Our speakers today are Gary Sainer, who is a Senior Manager of Information Solutions. He's a subject matter expert on medical device, UDI, and other structured content reporting to regulatory agencies and commercial organizations. Gary has over 30 years of experience in software development, process management, and data administration, and has focused on life sciences industry for the last 15 years or so. He's serving as chair of the industry's structured product labeling technical team and on the advisory board of the medical devices group. And we also have Patty Schrager, senior account executive, team lead, a problem solver, takes pride in strategic challenges. She consults with customers and prospects all over the globe on ReTech solutions for regulatory compliance, product data management, UDI submissions, and data syndication. And Patty is our multilingual business development professional speaking English, Spanish, and Portuguese. And she's worked with US and international companies. So a little bit about ReTech. ReTech is a leading provider of product data file submissions to health regulators with expertise in the preparation, submission, and lifecycle data management of medical device UDI product information. We've been in the industry since the beginning and have participated in pilots and trade groups and are members of MedTech Europe. ReTech systems are 21 Part 11 Annex 11 compliant. We've submitted over 730,000 SPLs to the FDA Good ID. That represents about 34% of all of the FDA Good ID SPL records annually. We do provide support for US, EU, China, Korea, and we're continuing to develop a roadmap for international UDI IDs. We serve over 450 medical device customers since the mandates began, and that's anywhere from small records to a large number of records. And our systems do provide flexible role assignments for in-country representatives and corporate users. With that, I will turn the agenda over to Patty Schrager, and she's going to take us through the discussion topics for today.
Thank you, Angela. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. So let's just jump right in. We've got quite a few topics that we want to cover today. We're going to start with Asian health authorities and provide some updates in terms of the deadlines and the timelines. We're going to talk about China, NMPA, South Korea, MFDS. We're going to get a little bit into other regions. We're going to talk a little bit about a global UDI approach, what to do now at this point, and leave some time for questions and answers. So Gary, why don't you take us through the Asian health authorities first?
Okay, well, thank you, Patty, and thank you, Angela. We'll get started with the review of many different health authorities. And I didn't put this up to scare you, but it does have a lot of bullets on there. Unfortunately, every red item is a deadline. So there's a lot of health authorities with timing. But this particular session, we want to focus in on some of the Asian health authorities. So South Korea had some activity in 2019, 2020. You see UAE, United Arab Emirates, and Japan and Turkey. Actually, Japan and Turkey go way back with some of their regulations with barcodes on their labels and have been collecting some device identifiers, but they don't have a UDI per se UDI repository like you would see perhaps in Europe or at the FDA. Good idea. The next slide is much more present, so it looks at last year, 2021, and this coming year, 2022. So this is, it should be raising some items on your agenda. So looking at China, there's activity that we'll concentrate on, review rather deeply. Taiwan has implants starting off with their class 3s in 2021 and some other implants in 2022. So South Korea will also spend a lot of time on South Korea. Actually, we'll spend most of the time on China and South Korea, and some of the others might have to reserve for appendix and a review as your own homework. But if we look at the future timeline, there is, again, it doesn't stop. It just keeps on rolling, a lot of busy activities with many health authorities. And for Asia, Saudi Arabia, Taiwan, Singapore, and China all have expected deadlines that would come into play. So we won't go through this in detail at this point, but if you have questions on it, you can get back to us. But we just wanted to level set the conversation that there are many health authorities out there. Today, we're concentrating on the Asia health authorities. And I think one of the things that we'd like to do is get an idea of what particular regions the audience markets their products in. So Angela, could you start us off with a quick poll and get some information there from the audience?
Yeah, so first poll question, and please participate. What regions do you market your medical devices? So select one: China and/or South Korea, Saudi Arabia, Taiwan, Singapore, Malaysia. So we'll give everybody a couple seconds, and appreciate you playing along as we launch a couple of polls throughout the discussion.
So that's a multi-choice there, answer, right? So we can pick multiple,
yeah.
Angela?
Uh-huh.
Okay, cool.
All right, I think we'll close the poll. And then if we want to see how everybody voted. So by and large, folks are participating in China and South Korea, followed by Saudi Arabia. Okay. Back to you, Gary.
All right, well, thank you. I think, Patty, you were going to open us up here with the China NMPA. So do you want to give us an opening here? I know this is one of the hot topics. You talk to a lot of customers, and it does reflect the audience that a lot of interest in China, a lot of deadlines coming into play.
Absolutely. Thank you, Angela. Thank you, Gary. So let's just jump right into China and the NMPA. So what is this regulation? When did it come about? We had an issue date in 2019. The scope for this is all medical devices sold and currently used in China. It's consistent with the IMDRF, which is important, the International Medical Device Regulations Forum. And there's no full schedule published. Lots of folks are very frustrated about this because they're trying to plan as they're very much global, and they have this requirement in many regions, but to date we have no full schedule published. With regards to the other piece of this regulation, number 739 as they refer to it, it really has to do with how medical devices are classified and managed according to the degree of risk of each of the devices in question. Next slide. So many of you who are involved with China may know that there was about a 1.5-year long pilot. And then we had an original date of October of 2020, which was meant to be the first batch 1 submission. But there was some delay, which was not really a big deal. It was just a couple of months. It was revised, and that first batch 1 deadline actually ended up being January 1st, 2021, which, as many of you know, was class 3 devices. There were about 69 categories, and they really had to do with very high risk implants and instruments. Now we have the batch 2 submission deadline. Now, interestingly, that too had a slightly different change in date. It was supposed to be March of 2022, but it's been pushed back just a bit, as you may know, to June 2022, which still doesn't leave a lot of time if you haven't begun that preparation period. So we really recommend that you start that as much as you can. The remaining class 3s are in play here that were not covered in batch 1. Next slide. So Gary, we get a lot of questions, probably too many for today to mention, but what is the timing for class 2 and class 1 devices as you know it?
Yeah, so that's a real frequent question, and we don't have good answers because they're really not supplied by NMPA. But as you had mentioned, the class 3s and what we will expect class 2s and class 1s are all driven by a compliance date. And that compliance date is really the milestone or the line in the sand, if you will, that needs to be observed. And by that date, registrants must register their products. So if there's an initial registration, or you're in the middle of renewing or changing your device registration, you'll need to complete that by that particular compliance date. And then before you put that product on the market, you will need to report the UDI to the UDI database and have UDI on the label. So if you were familiar with some of the FDA requirements, very similar, but you do have to get some information prepared early for the registration, which was a little bit different than the FDA. Those compliance dates, they were obvious in the notices that you were referring to, Patty, but the NMPA has not yet provided any notice for those class 2s and class 1s that are outstanding. So it's really just kind of wait and see. Might be a year, 2 years. I mean, it's a wild guess. We have heard some feedback from the industry where some of the provinces in China, as well as some of the hospitals, the early adopters, they were so pleased and aggressive in moving into UDI that they are very much interested in expanding that to other classes. So they might actually require UDI information long before the NMPA deadline comes into play. So industry might be pushing a little bit ahead of the NMPA in this particular scenario, Patty.
Thank you, Gary. So one other question, is it possible to submit data electronically to the NMPA database?
Yes, there's actually a couple options. So one of the ways in which you can submit data is log in, create an account on their web interface, do the manual entry. There's an option there for a manual file upload. But if you have the capability, the technology, you can certainly submit electronic machine-to-machine method, and that uses actually APIs where you're able to make a connection and transfer the information very fast without any transcription errors. There's a lot of advantages in submitting the data electronically, and there is a way to have that happen electronically. Now, the NMPA has created an XML standard for the data that they receive, and they're able to capture that according to their particular standard. And that's actually, Patty, as you know, one of the preferred ways that RETEC makes the transmission to health authorities. So we always make use of a machine-to-machine connection, and we do have API connection. So yes, a good solid yes here is the answer, that you can submit electronically to the database.
Thank you, Gary. So we wanted to talk a little bit about the manufacturing date with regards to China. It is slightly different than what we're accustomed to with the FDA. So to start with, it's important to note that the date format is year, 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 month, month, day, day, and the exact day is definitely required. With regarding to the manufacturing date, you have to have it on the product label. In the US, it's conditional. It's required on the label. It may be part of the production identifier, but it is absolutely imperative that it be on the product label in China. Now, a manufacturer is issued a license in China, and it's a 5-year license. You're able to produce products within that period, and that must be noted on the label as well. Very important to note. Once that license is up, you must apply for a new license. And again, they're good for 5 years. One thing that we've heard is that the supply chain and hospitals are really now urging manufacturing dates, even though it might not be yet regulated by UDI. Gary, for China UDI, what packaging levels need to be registered? We get this question a lot.
Yeah, there's a lot of confusion about this packaging level registration and reporting. There's a term that comes up in the China discussion about the lowest sales unit. So if you read the regs, and again, there's translation issues, but the term lowest sales unit would be referred to the particular package level that is commercially sold. So you might actually distribute it at one level and through the supply chain and maybe actually at the point of sale, it might be broken down into some smaller sales units. So you have to be aware of that. So let's try to illustrate this with a diagram, and we won't go through the full scenario, but many times your configuration, package configuration looks like this, where you have one product being used in a couple different areas. If we just take the first three for our discussion, let's say you just sell boxes out to a customer, and they might actually break boxes down and sell individual bags. So there's 5 bags in a box. In that particular case, you would need to register the bag device identifier. Now, if the scenario was a little bit different, let's say those bags were broken apart and the individual 4 units were sold, then that changes the scenario. Then the lowest sales unit would be the base product. So that is a little bit conditional, and you have to know what the lowest sales unit would be to answer that question about what is the level that needs to be registered. Now, there's a second half of that question, Patty, that comes into play, and that is, what device identifiers do I need to report to the UDI database? And there, the guideline is slightly different. In the UDI database, there's a reference that you report device identifiers for the lowest sales unit, so that's the same as before. But in addition, any higher levels that are related to that, along with the related data. So there's a lot of attributes for this particular package scenario. So it would most likely be the case that you might report one device identifier to the registration system, and you might report 2 or 3 device identifiers along with data to the UDI database. So it's a little bit of a mixed bag. You have to watch the terms and understand which database that you're referring to. Patty, I think you had another question about language.
Yeah, actually I do. For China UDI, does any of the UDI data need to be translated into Chinese? We get that often.
Yeah, well, there are a few attributes, 6 if I remember correctly off the top of my head here, that would require translation. There's one that is actually specified to be in English, but there are some free text attributes. So there, the Chinese language is expected. And there's also a few attributes that have controlled vocabularies, and those are in Chinese. So as you select from that particular controlled vocabulary, you would have another Chinese entry. One thing to note is that if you're been doing some studying with the European Union data set, they have the 2-level hierarchy with a basic UDI DI, buddy as its nickname, and a second lower level of attributes for the actual device. So this group buddy and individual device. That is not present in the China UDI database. So at least there's not that complication to going forward. But there are a lot of data attributes. Patty, do you want to go over the list here?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are 51 in total for China. So we've got 37 that are similar to the US, thankfully. For those watching, I'm sure that's a relief. Those are shown in black. We've got 14 that are unique to China. And in the yellow highlighted text, you can see these are the Chinese text fields that Gary was referencing. Thank you. So in summary, just a few things for you to keep in your mind. We've got the class or the batch 2 deadline coming up in June. Again, not a whole lot of time to get prepared for that. And to the right, you'll see some elements that are important for you to keep note of. You've got some labeling options that you can make sure you are familiar with. We've got the human readable interpretation there and the AIDC, the automatic identification and data capture. So those are just some summary points for you to keep in your files. So Gary, why don't we jump into South Korea?
All right, very good. Let's move attention over to South Korea. Some things are very similar, and yet there's a lot of things that are a little bit different. We have yet to see two health authorities really mimic each other. Many of them say they're kind of like the medical device, International Medical Device Regulatory Forum, but you know, they all seem to deviate and create their own. So as we look into South Korea, there's a couple legislation and regulations that are foundation. Now, this is only a partial list. They actually produced a number of guidance documents. Back in 2019, there was some barcode specs that were published. And in 2020, there was this final rule that came out. And there's a name for their database, the Integrated Medical Device Information System. So that is a system where, you know, the data is stored and you can access that, submit data to it. There is a way to do manual uploads. There's a way to do entry, and there's also electronic machine-to-machine APIs that we were talking about earlier. So the couple different submission methods. We're going to touch on these issuing agencies a little bit later, but this is where it deviates from China, and we'll dive into those particular details later. Now, the timing for South Korea, there's 4 different classes. So the high risk is 4 down to low risk 1. These have all, class 4, 3, and 2 have already taken place. So they're well on the way of collecting data for those particular classes. Very soon, mid 2022 is the deadline for this class 1. So if you do have class 1, obviously now's the time to get in the mix and figure out how you're going to be submitting.
So Gary, we have a, yeah.
I was just going to say that I think you get a lot of questions, and you put this in here to explore about the timing and whether or not you should submit for a past deadline.
Yeah, we get that question a lot. They are really curious about this. They don't want to be penalized. They want to understand if there is a hard and fast rule in terms of when they can submit until. So that's a great question for you, Gary. Do we have any insight there?
Yeah, it's something that we've noted, and the number of clients are still submitting class 4, 3, and 2s. So it's not like they closed the gate. And it's one of those things where it's better late than never. So you don't want to continue to be out of compliance. We have not been aware of any penalties or any enforcements that have come down. This is all pretty new, and all of industry is trying to react. So I'd be a little bit surprised if they levied any fines or anything like that as this program gets up and rolling. But you obviously don't want to extend that risk, and you don't want to be in that position. So I'd go ahead and make those efforts, good efforts, to meet the deadlines as soon as possible. Patty, I think you had another question about Was it track and trace? Yeah.
Yeah, we do get this question quite often as well. Is there a track and trace program today in South Korea?
So the regulations do specify a track and trace. You'll see the term a supply report in the regulations, and again, a lot is translated content. But a supply report is a monthly report that manufacturers, importers, sellers, and even leasing companies need to submit to MFDS, and it basically is a production report, a transaction report. So it has the information about the supply details and the distribution information. You know, who is the supplier, what is the product, how much you distributed, all the supply information, and so on. There's a form available that is used to record this information, Form 48-2, and you actually submit it to this IMDIS system, just as it's the very same system that we were talking about earlier for the UDI reporting. Now, one thing that we'll need to talk about is the timing of this report. When does it actually start? So we looked at this chart a little bit earlier, but now we need to add a track and trace column on the right, where you'll see the track and trace requirements follow the UDI compliance dates by 1 year. So this coming July would be the deadline for UDI reporting and on the label. And also in this July would be the track and trace starting compliance date for the class 2s. So, you know, this is something that you want to take a look at and work your way through. Patty, I think there's data on the next slide. Would you like to go over that?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you look at what we just covered for China, you can see there's about 40 data elements compared to what we had for China, which was 51. So 15 of these happen to be auto-populated. And then we have 15 that are similar to the US. They're shown here in black. Again, that's a benefit. And hopefully you'll be able to reuse some of that data that you've had for the FDA. And then we have 25 that are unique to South Korea, and those are all shown here in blue. So just as a summary, as Gary was mentioning, we've had a few of these deadlines pass. Now all that's remaining for South Korea is class 1, and that is in July. Just as we have some limited time for China, we also have to get moving on this next deadline for South Korea, just a few months out. So some of the, just a summary over here on the right, we've got 40 attributes that I just covered. You can hopefully be able to reuse some of those from the FDA. We've got some standards that you're familiar with, I'm sure, GS1, HIBIC, and ICCBA. And then we've got some labeling configurations with HRI, and AIDC. So this would be a good reference slide for you to keep. So with regards to other regions, we are aware that there's some early guidance that's coming out. We didn't prepare a whole lot in that regard because there just isn't a lot. We have some information that we've put in the appendix for you, but we can see this being good information to prepare for future webinars.
Yeah, Patty, I'll make a quick comment. Saudi Arabia had published a number of documents and made good progress, and then suspended their deadline, pushed their deadline back a little bit. But they, we've seen some images of their web page, and so they have some real life functionality. And what we're looking at is some more specifications about the actual data set. So that being an opportunity there to submit, probably by way of a spreadsheet initially, and there's hope that eventually it would be a machine to machine as well. And then there's some other points along the way here, Singapore, Taiwan, and so on. So we'll leave this for the audience to take a look at in the appendix, and there's summary little snapshots, note cards, if you will, for these particular countries, and it'd be a good reference for you to take a look at.
Yeah, thank you, Gary. So now we want to take a little bit of a look at the global UDI approach and perhaps how ReTech sees this.
Yeah, so I can help out there, Patty, in that discussion. Just to summarize the landscape, there are a number of regulatory requirements, health authority requirements, and we today focused on the Asian health authorities, but there are North America, South America, and Europe, and so on. In addition to that, we didn't take a whole lot of time to talk about UDI customer requirements, but there's a number of customers that are also requiring data from manufacturers. Now, we touched a little bit on track and trace, but that was in the context of a regulatory receiving that information. But there are a number of your customers that also want this information to keep their description of their product, their identification up to the latest and greatest version, and so on. And that only complicates the matter. We have seen that there are a number of technical challenges. When you look at the Asian requirements, you layer them onto the existing FDA and the pending EU, and pretty soon Saudi Arabia, Australia, and so on. It becomes a real task to harmonize all those, and when you get down to the details, all of a sudden you realize that there are many unique fields and definitions and gateways and different ways of dealing with each one of those, so there's many different variations. So when you look at that particular spaghetti mess, if you will, then it becomes a real need to attack this particular problem with master UDI and having a single flexible solution set, so that you can manage all those different data sets, the different interactions. In some cases, Patty showed that there were some common fields. You might actually have the potential to have a common value, but you might elect to have unique values. So that is all needs to be put into the mix. And then there's many particular attributes that are unique. So keeping track of that, building the particular gateway connection is all really a difficult task. To complicate matters, there are a number of issuing agencies, and they're not all the same list as you go from health authority to health authority. So this is one example where health authorities diverge from one another. So we were looking at China and South Korea today, and their particular set of issuing agencies is not the same. There's one particular common GS1, and if you were to look at this chart and try to decide on a single issuing agency, GS1 obviously would be your choice. And it's widely accepted, so there's actually some good reason to go there. You'll see it also accepted in US and EU. And then there's other HIBIC and ICCPA, and actually EU adds IFA as an option there. So one of the issues is that you might have identifiers that are for a particular region, and now mapping them together is very difficult. This is a question that comes up and is unique to the Asian health authority, China and South Korea. It's not an issue with the European and the FDA, US FDA, but there is this element of a localized rep. So in China and South Korea, the question about who is the party that's responsible for making data submissions. So is it the manufacturer or the authorized rep? So let's look at this scenario a little bit closer. If you're in country in China or South Korea, it's pretty obvious. The local manufacturer registers products. It gets a little bit more complicated if there's a foreign manufacturer importing products into China or South Korea. Now there is this requirement that a qualified local representative be involved and make those submissions. There are a couple different possibilities to meet the localized rep requirement. You might engage an independent local agent, and this is probably perhaps a long-standing relationship that you have, or this might be an opportunity to move to a different one. Or you might have a local importer or distributor fulfilling that role. And it's possible you have one entity that actually does both of those functions. It might be your local agent as well as an importer. The last three possibilities would be an extension of a global business. So you might have a fully owned office in country, or it might be majority or minority owned, a subsidiary or an affiliate. All of those particular representatives meets this requirement of being able to be a local rep for your product and be able to submit data. Now, historically, that usually becomes a little bit disjointed. You know, it's a handoff. Many times there's different time zones involved. Sometimes there's language issues, and there's some barriers in that communication of what's actually happening with your local rep, and you know, is that information getting shared and worked upon by the corporate individual. And that actually brings up a discussion about a global approach. And with internet and computers these days and remote logins and so on, we now have the opportunity to address that situation a little bit better. So in this particular scenario, you can have local and corporate users all using the same system. So in this particular example, we show the ReadTech model, where user accounts are able to be you know, provided to both the corporate and local users. They might come in there at different time zones. They might have different responsibilities and permission sets and so on. But one scenario might be that the corporate user might be responsible for filling in some corporate attributes to that particular data, whereas the local user might be more familiar with some of the local registration, and perhaps you know, they're able to do the translation. You know, who better to do the translation than your local rep for those particular fields that do need that translation in a local language entry. So they can actually partner now with this particular requirement of submitting data to the regional health authority. In this particular scenario, when they do have a single access point, single global solution, they're able to share information. So everybody's looking at the same report. They're looking at the same particular issues that might come up. You know, it's like, okay, if I have 1,000 records to submit and only, you know, 900 have been submitted, you know, how can we resolve this last 100? And of the 900 that were submitted, maybe there's 50 that have errors. So the corporate person can lend the resources to help address that. So a global approach now allows local users and corporate users to be on the same team, very closely knit together, and share a lot of this knowledge and work on the very same scenario. So that is one of the advantages of having a global approach. Now, from a corporate point of view, you might have already invested in a system for either US or EU perhaps, and this is just a way of extending that investment now to some of these other areas and adding an additional channel. In this particular scenario, it's bringing on local users to complement what you are doing inside that system. We can kind of summarize this discussion by taking a look at this graphic, where on the left-hand side, the task is to collect information from various sources using all the technology and infrastructure that might be available, and then having corporate and local users working together, pull that information together, and then transfer. There's a lot of actually options there when you connect up to the ReTech solution, where inside that solution you'll find import activities, process activities, and export activities. So being able to pull the data in from different sources asynchronously, merging it together and transforming it as necessary, and then adding a lot of value by the validation. All of that is on the front end, on the import. And then as you have interest, you can activate various steps along the workflow of reviewing, approving, and submitting, and then making sure that the actual transmission out to the targeted health authority was successful, receive back that confirmation, and be able to build reports on that particular scenario. So there's a global solution, I think, is, from what we have seen, a real practical and effective way to meet all these challenges around the world. With that, I think, Angela, there's a poll that you have lined up. So why don't we take a look at that poll and see if there's some different submission methods that are preferred out there.
Yeah, so if you folks would like to participate, which product data UDI submission method do you prefer? Are you electronic machine to machine where available, manual entry, or manual spreadsheet upload where available? So we'll give it a couple of seconds here.
So do I have to pick one, Angela?
Yeah, for this, you have to, and forgive me for the prior poll, it did only default to one, so that's bad on me.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and close this poll. And then let's take a look at how we ended up. Yeah, so machine to machine preferred where available, manual spreadsheet upload where available, quite a bit of the audience, 31% there. Okay.
All right, well, that certainly makes a lot of sense. Patty, where we want to go? We have a few minutes remaining here, and we want to reserve some time for Q&A.
Yeah, Gary, I mean, we've presented a lot of information, and for those on today, where do they begin? Can you summarize maybe a few key steps so that they could actually get started and come up with a plan?
Yeah, sure. There's a couple slides here that illustrate some good practices that we're familiar with and would recommend. So, you know, the first step of this train ride is to get on board and make the step, right? So you got to get on board, find your seat, and start plugging away. Otherwise, you know, you're back on the landing and the train departs, right? So what are some actual recommendations? So we actually have put together 4 C's for this particular process. So they all begin with the letter C. But foundational is create an environment and then collecting the data, cleansing that data, and then actually complying with regulations. So you see a lot of work actually even before you submit data to the health authority. So the first 3 are, you know, just all prep work, and if you do that correctly with high quality, then the last one actually becomes pretty easy and actually goes faster. So we see probably 80% of the effort on the first 3, and 20% or less, even maybe 10% of the effort and time complying with the regulations, meaning what I'm referring to there is the actual submission of the product. So if we take a look at each one of these, I don't think we have time to dive into the sub bullets here, but when you create your environment, just to highlight some of the important things would be to make sure you have that good team. You hopefully have that UDI team already in place from some other health authorities. But now the timing for the Asian market is, staggered a little bit, and you might have a different mix. So you might have to go back and readjust the members on that team, pull new people in, and so on. Make sure you're aware of your situation and create a plan, and make sure that all are on board and educated with that particular task. Number two there is to collect data. So finding data, in this case, it might be different repositories, different time zones, different laptops, different computers, and it might be shared by some of the health authority databases and your corporate databases. So this might be a little bit more difficult than what it was for collecting data for the FDA, for example. But you do want to establish some data governance. Who's going to own this record, and particular down to the individual particular field. So if there's a change on this particular value, who's going to take the responsibility and make sure it's passed along and manage the overall maintenance of this particular record in various data sets. Cleansing the data is very important. Pretty straightforward there, but it's a huge task. So making sure that the data matches up with what the health authority is going to expect and the checks that they apply. So you might have some data, but and you think it's good quality, but when you look at the particular validation match up to what the FDA or the health authority has, you might see some problems. So maybe you didn't collect the data in the correct controlled vocabulary, or you might have some missing fields, and just being able to verify the data is very important, getting that normalized to the point where you're able to submit. And lastly, you'll need to create those regulatory accounts. And again, for the Asia discussion, this will involve your local rep to create those accounts and be involved in this actual submission activity. So submitting the data, making sure the record is successfully received, recording that acknowledgement, and keeping track of all that is the end of our 4 C's here. These 4 steps of creating, collecting, cleansing, and complying. I think with that, Angela, let's save the balance of time for a poll question. The last one, I think, for your poll, and then maybe we'll do some live Q&A.
Yeah, if folks would participate, how are you planning to meet your global UDI submissions? Is it an in-house developed system, health authority manual interface, third-party vendor, such as installed on your premises, or an external platform, software as a service? And Gary, while we're waiting, we did have a question, I think, just to clarify about probably the global, the Good ID, the way that it's named. These are all separate databases when we're talking about health authority. So there's not one database that will feed into another. Is that correct?
Yeah, Angela, you bring up a dream that many people had, when they first heard the FDA use the term a global UDI database, and my mind went there as well. It's like, oh, this is going to be shared by every health authority. How wonderful. And yet, and really what it boiled down to, it was the FDA global database, only for US information. Now, the data is globally unique, but it's by health authority, and it's segregated by health authority. We have seen no efforts or means for health authorities to start share this information. It doesn't look like they have, that is a high level priority. I don't think it's going to happen. If it does, it'll be quite a while. But yeah, it's a little bit of a misnomer to talk about the global UDI database, Good ID, when it's a national database.
Right. Okay. Well, we've had a number of questions come in, so we have a couple of minutes left here. So I will just kind of start posing a couple of those to our speakers, and thank you very much to those of you who've participated in the polls and submitted your questions. We appreciate those. So first question, how do the China data attributes match up to US? Are there any that are optional, or are there any that are kind of gotchas? Meaning that folks have been having problems in interpretation.
Yeah, that's, let me jump back to, I think I can find the, the China database list here pretty quickly. So there are a number of fields, and you'll find this true in all the data sets, that there are some that may not apply. So you'll leave them as null or blank. And in some cases, there are fields that rely on each other. So we call those group attributes there, where there's dependencies. If you fill in one value, you'll need to fill in another. So let me just highlight, this group of 4 down here: the package DI, the package quantity, package contains DI, and the package type. Well, this is a set, a quad of information. If you fill in one, you have to fill in the other 3. So you kind of have to watch out for that. And there are some fields that you're able to share, but you may not to. There is a little bit of a gotcha when you start reading the details. For example, you go to this MRI safety status. Well, that's a field that you would see in the US, and there's a field in the EU related to that. But in some cases, the actual pick list, the control vocabulary is different. So you might have an answer that is appropriate for China, and yet when you go to the FDA, it's a different answer. So even though the field name is the same, the actual values are different. So you actually have to treat that as 2 separate fields. So yeah, we could go on and on, some of these examples, but I think you get the idea that there are some gotchas. There are some, local information. So, one of the items that we have seen is this unified social credit code. There's medical insurance code and so on, that many times the corporate user is not aware of, and would rely on the local representation. So beware of that. And then also the translation. So that's another gotcha, to make sure you have the translation.
On the translation, there was a question about, is that referring to Mandarin or Cantonese? Do we know the answer to that?
Off the top of my head, I don't know. Let's get back to that person on that one.
Okay. All right, there was a question about Saudi Arabia, actually, asking about machine-to-machine UDI submissions. Is that possible?
Yeah, well, not as of yet. So there is, the only thing that I have seen, and Patty, jump in here if you're talking to a number of clients as well, but the Saudi Arabia user interface, web interface, is manual entry only as of today that I'm aware of. And we're hoping that there will be a spreadsheet file that would be made available so that you could upload multiple records at a time. And then even the next generation, we hope that there'll be like an API or other type of gateway where you could handle machine to machine. Patty, have you had any experience other than what we're hearing, from the regulatory,
No,
published
Gary,
information?
I agree with what you're saying. In fact, there is a lot of curiosity as to, will they get to machine? They're hoping it does something similar to what we saw with South Korea. We didn't get to machine until the class 2s, if I recall. So people are hopeful, but they're a little concerned and are watchful and wanting to see how this kind of continues forward.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, we've got a couple more questions here. We may want to refer back to the in-country representative. There's a couple of questions around that. you know, if there were, say there were a change in representatives, is there a control risk there? Also, I think just another simple explanation about working through RETEC, if say you're in South Korea and there's a in-country representative required, how would that work with submitting data?
Yeah, so we've worked with the local reps. Some of the details would be that they actually create an account in the health authority, and well, for South Korea, or it would be IMDIS, and they create an account there. And we've actually provided a way that those credentials can be securely entered into our system so that only that one person is aware of those credentials. Excuse me. And once that is in place, then the system is able to submit into the account. So if, sorry, I hit the wrong key here, but if I go back to that scenario where the local user would actually create an account in the health authority, very much like a user would create an account in the FDA Good ID or in UDI, and now they create an account in the health authority. And then some electronic credentials are placed into our system so that electronic values are able to be submitted into that account. So it's the very same account that ends up from the electronic submission as what would have happened for a manual submission. And then over the course of time, you're able to submit data and have confirmation back. But then as a cross check, a local user could go into the health authority account and get a confirmation that, you know, everything is moving along smoothly. We do highly recommend that you don't make changes in two different systems. So if you elect to use electronic submissions, it's not a good idea to, you know, bypass that and make some manual submissions, or, you know, but even vice versa. The problem is that now you have two systems that are out of sync, and you want to make sure that you have one common pathway for all the data flow. So it's okay to take a look and peek and view, but when you actually send updates, use your preferred standard method. I don't know if is there something that you wanted to add to that, Patty?
No, I was going to say, I think you answered that pretty well.
Yeah, I would just add that I find that our clients love the idea of actually having visibility of what's happening with their data in these regions. Whereas with the former model, they did not. And this gives a high level of confidence that things are going as planned. So it's really important.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially reusing data that you can across regions, because some of it you possibly can. So that's one of the powers of the single source. A couple questions about Taiwan. So do we know much about machine-to-machine submissions to Taiwan? Is that possible?
I have not seen machine-to-machine submission to Taiwan as of yet. So again, it's one of those hopefully soon situations. But you know, when it comes to high volume, it's just really difficult to manage it in a manual way. So yeah, I know that many times companies or health authorities are trying to roll this out very quickly. They're strapped for resources. Actually, COVID has not helped the matter. Being able to get everybody on board and you know, working with a full team. So the short answer is I'm not aware of anything for Taiwan as of yet for machine to machine.
Okay, great. Well, it looks like we're at the top of the hour. Thanks again to all of our registrants and being so engaging with your questions. And if we didn't get to your specific question, someone will definitely follow up with you. We included a couple of handouts in the webinar tool. So do download those, share them with your team. And again, when we package all of this up, we will send a follow-up email to everyone with link to review the recording and the slides. Don't hesitate to reach out if you have questions. Email us at meddevice@readtech.com. Thank you to our presenters, and everybody have a great Tuesday.
Thank you, Angela.
Thank you, Angela.
Thanks, Patty.
Thank you, Gary.
Righto, bye now.